Our next guest is Roger Spitz with Disrupting Existence, The Future Me. Roger is the founder of Existential and Disruptive Futures Institute. He's a member of the Association of Professional Futurists, and he is the National Association of Corporate Directors. He sits on several advisory boards of companies, venture capital funds, and academic institutions worldwide. Welcome, Roger.
Fantastic to be with you today. So we're going to fire away and we're going to kickstart on the future me. And we're going to look at what disrupting existence is and why are we even talking about disrupting existence? When we think about existence and disruption, both have existed for pretty much quite a bit of time. So if you consider the very difficult events of about 100 years ago, someone who was born in 1915, 1914, by the time they're 30, they would have been through pretty difficult and unimaginable events, right? The global influenza pandemic in 1918 killed 50 million deaths, the 2 world wars, there was a Great Depression, and of course, the first nuclear bomb ever detonated in Japan. So that is very significant disruption, and disruption as a concept is not new. One way I find quite interesting to look at history and to look at how we can slice time in a sense is Heilbronner. Heilbronner wrote a book called Visions of the Future, the Distant Past, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And he slices human history in 4. This book was written in 1995, so today will be 1995. And he looks at the distant past, which was a period of resignation, which was about 150,000 years ago, the prehistorical times, the evolution of the Homo sapiens. And at that point, the future was no different from the past. It was pretty similar, pretty linear. He then gives a second phase to slicing human history as yesterday. So that's 1700 to 1950s. And here there's an optimistic outlook. The future can be better. There's a view that change is starting to be discernible. Science is flourishing. And then he defines today, which again is 1995 for Heilbronner. So that's 1950s to 1995. And he's looking at an era of anxiety and pessimism, a search for meaning. These are the modern times that most of us are sort of familiar with. Capitalism gains control, and the fears and challenges, which are kind of omnipresent and progressing with this way society and technology and things evolve. What I think is quite interesting is the 4th period. Heilbronner spends less time on tomorrow, which is effectively the 21st century. He sees a continued search for meaning in this postmodernist time. But what's interesting is that he believes that capitalism and democracy will be dominant. But the most interesting aspect for me is the concept that humanity will be constant. And so this is where our discussion will focus on debating whether that assumption and that view of the 4th phase of the 21st century of tomorrow, where the concepts of humanity are constant, are valid. I personally believe that today we're faced with the most profound questions around the very fundamental features of our world, about the essence of existence and human life in the not so distant future. And this is really the focus of what we're going to spend, the next half hour or so together with discussing. And it translates, to my mind, in a number 10 existential questions. We'll cover some of them in our session this afternoon or this morning or whatever time zone you're in. Well, first one is, what is life? What is life when biology, technology, and artificial intelligence fuse? When you can re-engineer life, when you're editing genes, when you're printing biological tissues or organs, and when you can communicate directly between the brain and computers? What is life when the genetic engineering, synthetic biology means that with algorithms, in a way, we're playing God, where technology is allowing us to create inorganic life? And then the same existential questions arise in terms of work, information, what is governance, what is hospitable, what is reality, value, money, what is it to be human, what's technology, what's longevity. So we're going to take this journey together and look at some of these questions. Longevity in its own right, which is by definition intrinsically linked to humanity. How long can or should a human live? Is it 150, 200 years, 300 years? What is possible today as we're moving to an era of genetic engineering, where there are initial breakthroughs and a lot of research and developments around eliminating untreatable genetic conditions? What is a world where AI can predict vaccines and prevent illnesses before they spread? Now, of course, many of us will be cynical with the likelihood of that in a world where we've just experienced and still experiencing the pandemic. But still, don't underestimate the developments in drug discovery with AI. It's actually AI, a Canadian company called Blue Dot, which discovered before the CDC and anyone else that there was actually a pandemic in October or November 2019. And the fact that the vaccine became available within a year and a bit is really makes history. There have been a phenomenal number of developments in terms of vaccines and other things, thanks to AI and drug discovery. And what is it with nanobots and nanotechnologies when you can have medical care living inside your body, replacing body parts and possibly curing with very small robots or machines inside your body? With the Internet of Existence, where you have sensors inside your body connected to the outside world, understanding the dynamics between public health and your own body day to day. And simply, as we mentioned earlier, inorganic life, when gene editing redefines what life itself is and aging. Now, as we're moving towards that, you'll need to think about how do you update life and societal structures? What about money and learning and working and overpopulation in this world? What are the benefits of the intergenerational wisdom, the long-term thinking, and the concept of life and time itself will be completely redesigned? Or if you think about governance, what are countries, governments, and organizations tomorrow? We've all been used to the past centuries, millenniums of centralized hierarchical control structures. There's unequal access. You have restrictions. Society understands and knows that somewhere there's a country or governance structure which is imposed on most of the majority. What is it like when there's permissionless governance, where there's self-organized, decentralized basis which is governing with no barriers to entry, fewer regulations? There are positives to that. There are many negatives as well. The role of humans and the relationship between humans and technology. And when you have billions of people that can be reached instantaneously, where technology controls the media, where opinions can be swayed instantly, and where the power of people is unequaled maybe by those manipulating them through information. What does that look like in terms of governance? And what is work in a world where anything can be automated, anything can be cognified? Cognified means to be made smarter, more intelligent with artificial intelligence or with software, where everything can be decentralized, digitized, disintermediated, or virtualized. We've seen already over the past 12 months that a lot of this is already reality. This is increasing every day significantly. So these shifts are radically transforming every aspect of the economy, every industry, every sector, every profession, every job, the meaning of work itself. When we look at technology, there's a very interesting paper which was written by Stephen Harwood and Sally Eves called Conceptualizing Technology, Its Development and the Future, 6 genres of technology. And the authors, they think about both technology and humans as a complex interacting system, both of whom have some form of agency. Now, what's interesting here is to think about technology having some form of agency. But they go further. They look at these 6 genres of the relationship. The first one is this zero technology. You have just humans, which are interconnected, autopoietic. Autopoietic means that it's the self and that it's the creation, the production. So it's a system that's capable of reproducing and maintaining itself. Humans can do that pretty well. They've been doing it for quite some time. Animals as well. And I personally believe that you don't have anything today which has zero technology, where you only have a human-human relationship. I think that anything that exists today has technology. The second genre is amplified humans. Technology amplifies communication, but they're really using it as an artifact. And then we're more in zone 3 or 4 today, where it's digital shift. Humans use technology as a tool to create new technologies. And we're moving into intelligent machines where the humans activate technology through technology, but then the humans are withdrawing. In other words, with machine learning and self-coding, more and more we have intelligent machines. The next phase is autonomous collectives, where the technologies are autonomous and interconnected. And the final phase would actually be no human involvement. So the artifacts or the technology is not only interconnected and technological beings, but autopoietic. In other words, they are able to reproduce and maintain themselves. Now, that might seem absurd, but if you think about technology and its evolution and machine learning and the fact that it's becoming more intelligent and neural networks, actually, we are on our way. We are probably already in intelligent machines number 4. We're starting to see appetizers and teasers, whether we like it or not, of number 5. And number 6, it may not be so absurd. So when we put all that together, we need to think about what language is actually probably the most important language in the world. And it's the language of data. We need to think about Internet of Existence, where every single thing in the world, whether we believe it or like it or realize it or not, is data. That information drives knowledge and gives insights. But today you have biometrics everywhere, from your switching on your computer phone to anything you touch. You have more and more clothes, you're implanted, you're wearing things that are physical, but also biological and connected. Sensors, you can be hacked, just like a computer can. You can be replicated. And so there's a question in terms of what that means, that any human being, any government, anything is relying so heavily on data, which can basically be breached and attacked and distorted. These are really areas where data is biting back, because in a way, are we prepared and able to process what it means that anyone, anywhere in the world, a 16-year-old kid sitting in any country in the outskirts of Moscow or anywhere can basically hack into US government systems, can hack into your body, can hack into pretty much anything, can influence how we might perceive things, and can also interrupt the flow of information or data, which basically means the world stopping. And so as data is biting back, it's evolving and it's moving towards aspects which are what we knew from a few decades ago, which is software eating the world, which is the VC Anderson who coined this term to say that everything is being digitized, demonetized. So that's basically software, it's computer applications. Everything's being dematerialized and democratized in terms of information. So you can access anything, anywhere, anytime. There's almost no marginal cost to producing that. And you're moving now to the middle box, which is software is eating software. You're in an environment where you have no code or low code. You're in an environment with machine learning and deep learning, where the code is written by the data itself. To our earlier point, not necessarily always needing human intervention. I have very many debates with my niece on this topic, who's also in the Silicon Valley and who's understands these things far better than I ever will and far more clever, but she's a machine learning engineer and she tells me that it's not yet the case. But I like the fact that these discussions yield on the fact that it's not yet the case, because the elements and the signals as to code being written by data are not yet there in an autonomous way, in an independent way, but that is the direction and that is the velocity. And so you're moving to the third phase of data biting back, which is the metaverse eating in real life, where virtual goods and virtual worlds are becoming as important, if not more important, than the real world, where a Gucci bag sold in Roblox for virtual money that can't be monetized is being sold more than a real Gucci bag in real life, where 30% of the world population is spending billions of hours every month, billions of dollars every month in a virtual world. This is an environment where what I call DEIP, everything is delocalized, experiential, immersive and personalized, where you have digital synergies between technologies which allow immersion, 5G, Internet of Things, sensors, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, machine learning. And that artificial intelligence is also involving natural language processing, which means that you don't even need physical keyboards anymore. You can just speak and the computers understand. And of course, we all look at Alexa and Google Home, and our assumption is that they don't even understand what the weather is. And therefore, we will assume that Alexa and machine learning is not working, but that's wrong. That's a misinterpretation as to what's happening. Because today, Alexa understands probably not that much, and neither does Google Home. But again, if you look at the velocity and the trajectory, once it goes from understanding 95% of speech to 99% of speech, no one will ever use a keyboard anymore. And then you have artificial reality, which is, are you in real virtual life or are you in virtual real life, where the brain can communicate with computers and where materials technology is having so many fundamental breakthroughs with nanotechnology and holographic materials breakthroughs that you can basically see, hear, feel, and smell virtually anywhere in the world. So what does it mean in terms of digital teleportation or space travel if you can actually feel, see, hear, smell virtually? What is the difference between science fiction, between science fact? This liminal world is one where you have blurred zones between different spaces. Normally, liminal or liminality is used to distinguish a blurry zone between two distinct phases. So you enter a phase and then things are a little bit blurred and then you get out and it's a different and new era or phase. What's happening now is that liminal is a constant. What is an agent or its environment? What is in real life or artificial reality? What is natural or artificial, truth or fiction, real or fake? What is authentic or synthetic? What is meat or alternative meat? What is a competitor or partners in different ecosystems? What is science fiction? What is science fact? Home, education, working, retiring, learning, unlearning, relearning. What is human or transhuman? And so this liminal state applies to everything. There are no different phases. There's no normal or post-normal. There are no phases where you just simply get out of this liminal zone. It's permanently blurred. This is in an environment where you have, this is the World Economic Forum and the top 10 risks, which they consider to be the biggest risks for humanity. I call them existential risks. But if you look at the left column is the likelihood and the right column is the impact. Half of these are related to the environment, failure of climate action, biodiversity loss. Others are due to human nature, weapons of mass destruction, IT infrastructure that could break down, etc. Digital inequality, social elements, diseases. But these past few years, actually, things like infectious diseases have been top of this list for close to a decade. But of course, humanity ignores these existential risks, as we've seen with the pandemic. And so when we think about the speed of information, the speed of change and what's happening in the world, these existential risks are that much more important and prevalent than they've ever been. So as we think about all this and as we have an eye to the future, one of the biggest things which I think is really a cognitive bias, which as humans, we're not very good at thinking about, is exponential change. And we've all learned exponential change at school. We know the formula, we think we understand it, but actually we don't necessarily have a good sense of processing it. And this illustration is to try and show that if we take, these are 3 lakes, so assume they're 3 lakes with water lilies. So this is based, take the Monet paintings in the Nymphéa in Giverny in France, and think of these as the water lilies, which are growing at 100% rate every day. And think about for 30 days, every single day, these water lilies are growing by 100%, so doubling. And the first little pond on the left, day 1 to 23, actually means that for the first 23 days, even though the water lilies are doubling every day, less than 1% of the pond will be covered. On day 28, 25% of the pond is covered. And then on day 30, it's 100%. But because it doubles every day, until day 23, you don't notice it. So think back February or March 2020, think about the pandemic. Now project that to technology, project that to everything that is happening at warp speed. The gradually then suddenly is an expression from Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises. And he had the question in the book to one of the characters, how did you go bankrupt? Gradually, two ways I went bankrupt. Gradually, then suddenly. And so actually the way to think about exponential is exactly that. It's gradually, then suddenly. But humans, we have a myopic, a cognitive bias where we think is the world in a linear way. We think about trying to extrapolate and predict as opposed to preparing. We think about growing and incremental as opposed to exponential, and what in technology terms, the power of platforms or networks. This increasing rate of change is one which is for real. It's not science fiction. So when you take technology, for instance, when you look at the past few months, you can see, for instance, how quickly things are moving. You can see that 10 years ago, 25% of the world were on internet. The first smartphone was only 2007. By 2018, 50% of the world is on internet. So that's an additional billions of people. When you're looking at the first drug discoveries and antibiotics, they're being discovered by artificial intelligence today. When you look at some of the things that are happening on the moon, or virtual reality contact lens, some company I know here in the Valley called Mojo Vision produces contact lenses which already have virtual reality. So it's not a question of whether virtual reality will be a thing. You already have lenses that you can wear that can detect and see things in a virtual reality world. And for the anecdote, that company, Mojo Vision, has just been accepted on the accelerator of Disney. So you're thinking the future of entertainment, Disney is already projecting a world where you're wearing contact lenses and where you're watching things in virtual reality. So this is the speed with which things are moving. So this end of linear is one where you need to think about a lot of the references we have as linear, which make us human, which is the essence of the existence we know, the three-phased life versus a 100-year life or modified aging. You need to think about the specializations we have and the specializations we focus on versus having more general, broader knowledge. What is planned, what you prepare for versus what suddenly emerges. So all these aspects are directly linked to what one might see as the end of a linear world. And this arises in a time when not only do you have the convergence between technologies, where you have machines interacting with other machines and cognitive computing, but you have fusion, what I call fusion 5.0, where the machines are becoming intelligent, aware, and social, where you're merging biological with physical and digital. This is a context where the environment we're in is what I call beyond complicated. This is the Kinnavan framework by Dave Snowden, who divides different levels of the environment in terms of features. And we're going to look at the top two ones. Complicated is when you can understand the cause and effect. It's where you can rely on experts because you have known unknowns. You have a range of right answers. AI is actually very strong in the complicated zone. And here what happens is that you can rely on these specialist experts. If you want to drill oil outside of the coast of the state of Rio, you can rely on the right kind of engineers to see where in the sea do you drill, how do you extract the oil. Complex, you only understand the cause and effect afterwards. They are unknown unknowns. There are no right answers. You have to develop emergent practices. So that's the Amazon. If you change something, you might not know what it impacts. There are no right answers. You're going to have to test things or be respectful of the ecosystems and that everything is hyper-connected. When you look at artificial intelligence and decision-making, artificial intelligence is very good with what we call complicated versus complex because they are right answers, there's cause and effect. But if you look at what is decision-making and where does artificial intelligence play a role, decision-making is you can detect and collect intelligence, you then interpret it, and then you make and you implement decisions. The initial part is descriptive. You're analyzing data, it's historic. AI is very good with that. And then you're interpreting that. You're looking for pattern recognitions. You're looking for insights to support those decisions. This is analytics. It's what we call predictive. And algorithms are very good with that because there's some degree of predictability. The prescriptive area is where humans have an edge today, where you need to make decisions. What is it that makes decisions human? It's kinesthetic intelligence. It's the timing, the sense. It's what you have the temporal lobe for. It's the emotional intelligence. It's where you use instinct, intuition, self-awareness, consciousness. There are no algorithms that can help for this. You're not using the prefrontal cortex. You're really thinking about navigating and managing this complexity. It's creative problem solving. You're experimenting, testing, prototyping. The consideration here is that when you think about disrupting existence and when you're thinking about what it is to be human, there's a question as to whether intelligence and decision-making and the emotional realm are an exclusivity for being human. Machines are continuing to learn fast and with increasing levels of human functions and understanding. So what domains of expertise, what will it be to be human and to remain human in terms of intelligence? So here we have cut this in four, looking at the value chain of decision-making. Optimization is what historically computers have been very good at, automating very repetitive processes, simple, narrow processes. You then look at augmentation, where you're starting to look at slightly more autonomous intelligent systems, your wealth management, advising your robo-advisor to advise where to put funds, radiology. You're looking at specific domains though. You have predictive analytics, they recognizing patterns, the algorithms can curate content, trading algorithms, risk reduction. There are a number of things that in terms of decision-making, augmentation is helpful and computers have a key role. Now we're moving towards hyper-augmentation, where computers and AI is helping with the creativity. And that's wonderful for scientific research and drug discovery. Maybe less so for lawyers when they're helping draft contracts or for musicians when they're composing music or doing dance and choreography. But that is a joint venture. The humans have a role there, and there's content or elements being discovered and created, and there's a joint symbiosis. And today in complex systems, which we looked at earlier, where you need more judgment, where there are no right answers, where there are unknown unknowns, where it's an emergent, this is where the strategic decisions or the decisions human excel at. And so the question which arises, and the real question for me when I look at this is, how do we make sure we stay human and we stay relevant? And how do we make sure that symbiosis with machines and with everything else that's happening is the right one for humanity? We call this a being AAA. And AAA we see as the agility to bridge emergence, and we're going to look at that in a minute. Building that on anti-fragile foundations and with anticipatory preparation. And you need the agency to do that philosophically. And you also need everything to be aligned. And so that is the AAA. Fragility versus anti-fragility. Fragility means that if a shock happens, you get more downside from that shock. Even if it's not very likely to happen, the impact is so huge that it basically creates a problem for you. When you look at anti-fragile, that's where innovation has a role. You get more, you actually get a benefit from the shock. Not only are you resilient, but you even do better from the fact that there was a shock. You thrive on the uncertainty and the randomness. And this is what is required for complex systems. You like errors because you're always testing, experimenting. You understand that there's not causal independence. You understand that there's opacity. You understand that there's unpredictability. And so this complex systems and the fact that the world is more and more complex, or the cost of not understanding that the world is complex is greater today if we get it wrong, means that we need anti-fragile frameworks and foundations. Because if we don't have those, when shocks happen, and they do happen and will happen, things break. Developing anti-fragility is linked to innovation and linked to thinking and to understanding that the world is disruptive, that there is constant change. And so that is really one of the essential aspects of the AAA. The second one is the agility. And to think about agility, we need to think about what emergence is. Emergence is because we don't know in advance what will happen, because there are too many unknowns. And so we need to receive information, assess, make sense of the environment. And depending on how we react with the environment, what information we get and what happens, we either dampen that feedback if it's negative and not getting us to where we need to, or we're amplifying that. But that is a real-time event that is happening. It is not something you can just rely on experts or your parents or your teacher to help you with. I call this mechanism for developing agility emergent and strategic agility. Think of it in terms of a loop, and think of a bridge with 3 sections. On the right, you have the long term, and the long term is, what do you think about for the future? What is the future you aspire to? What is your vision? In the middle, it's short term. It's not now, but it's soon, and it's not as far away as the long-term future. And you're constantly updating information, getting new information. And then there's the emergence, which is the here and now, the present. And one of the hardest things that everyone is struggling with in this more complex world is reconciling between the strategic agility between the long term and the short term, and what I call the emergent agility between the short term and the emergence. And these two are bridges. They are infinite loop bridges whereby they don't stop. You're constantly getting feedback and assessing how you're moving and how you're emerging with that. And even if you're thinking long term, you're making those decisions short term now. The decisions you make today are for the future, even though you make them today. How do you do that? You have to erase what you know or assume you know or what you're relying on. You need Shoshin, which is in Japanese, beginner's mind. This is a calligraphy by a friend of mine, Nai, who wrote Shoshin in Japanese, and it's really having the beginner's mind. With the beginner's mind, which is a child's mind, everything is possible. You mustn't judge. You must find your patterns for yourself. You must really listen. You must question everything. You have to be genuinely curious because you can't rely on there being just answers available. And so that experimenting, that child life, that testing, that prototyping is really a beta version of your life. When I think about disruption, I don't think disruption is necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I think it's just simply a feature that's actually constant and that's accelerating. I don't think that disruption is a one-off or specific event. It's a steady state. It's a constant. And many philosophies, including Eastern and Japanese philosophies and Zen Buddhism, have that understanding that change is constant. It's only in a world where we're oversimplifying and making assumptions about the world, often a Western world with predetermined views of life, that we feel that anything that disconnects with what we imagine or assume it to be is a problem. But many other philosophies in the world understand that change is a constant. But what is happening is that the fundamental paradigms are increasingly changing. And the impact of these changing paradigms, the impact of the disruption will depend on how prepared you are and the responses, because the impact in a complex world is disproportional to what happens. So something small might happen, but the impact might be huge. And so even though it's a small event or low probability event, in a complex world, what happens is that the impact and the cost, if you're not responding correctly and preparing in the right way, is greater. And this simply means that we've moved from a world of risk or uncertainty to what we call deep uncertainty. Deep uncertainty is a world where you don't know what any of the possibilities might be, and there might not even be a consensus on what these possibilities might be. So think about aware and intelligent machines. How intelligent and how aware are machines going to be? Are they going to be as intelligent as humans, less or more? Will we colonize and commercialize and live in space? It's not a question of just a probability. It's think of how life-changing that would be, and the fact that we don't know if and when that might happen. Think about the consequences of climate change. Are the storms that are taking place and the disrupted weather linked to that? Are they just a small appetizer? Are they just what will become a constant in 1 year, in 10 years, in 20 years? What does it mean if you live in New York or London and the whole city can be flooded? What does it mean in terms of the buildings you need to build? Do you ignore it? What are the questions in terms of healthcare and gene editing that we looked at earlier? What does it mean if within a few decades we can live hundreds of years? So that is deep uncertainty. There are unknown possible future events, and there's not even an agreement of what they might look like. Uncertainty is what most people think of in terms of the world. You don't know exactly the likelihood of the events, but you think you have a handle and there's a consensus on the 3 or 4 possibilities. So that's a question of, will China be the #1 economy in the world? Will there be a pandemic? Will there be an earthquake? That is a specific number of events. You probabilize them, you take a view on them, and there's some uncertainty. And then risk is, if you smoke, what is the likelihood or probability that you might get cancer or what have you? And so as we move towards deep uncertainty, that is the complex environment we live in. And so the reason why I actually think it's a positive thing that there's deep uncertainty is that if you take an existentialist perception of disruption and of the world, and if you think about yourself as agents with freedom and choice, deep uncertainty provides more freedom and choice as long as you exercise the agency and with alignment. So in philosophical terms, if you take existentialist philosophy, for instance, what we call essence precedes the existence means that the world is deterministic. It means that you have a reductionist view, a Newtonian view of the world with certain assumptions where you can predict the future, where you can understand cause and effect, and therefore, that reductionist view, those assumptions are correct and will have a cause and effect. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we live in a world which is complex. In a complex world, I actually see that as a world where existence precedes the essence. It means you exist, you then make choices with the agency you have, and that freedom builds your beingness and your essence. And it's a world which is contingent, where there are choices. And that is actually something where you have more optionality, you have more things that you can do. If everything was predetermined, you have less choice, you have less agency. And so to wrap up, I like to use the analogy of a glider. If you take the female glider here, she needs to keep moving, not to fall. She needs to find the right balance between the weight, the velocity, the weather, the wind conditions. These are constantly updating to avoid the tree, but she has freedom as to where she can glide. She has quite good visibility on things, but she has to be very agile to make the choices here and now to have that control and visibility. If you take the gentleman who's reading the map, who's in the maze, he may not even realize that the maze is changing. He thinks he has a map. He thinks he knows where he's going. The maze might change all the time, even if he doesn't know what's around the corner. There might be a black swan with unexpected events, or gray rhino, or trees, or wonderful lake, or some amazing things he wouldn't even know. And so really, my closing kind of comment in terms of the theme which our friends Andrea and Maria gave for us from Future Hacker, which is disrupting existence, the future me. The future me has to be one with agency, where you exercise the agency with the choices and freedom ahead, understanding that you're not disconnected from the world, understanding that you need to be aligned for things, for you to exercise that agency, understanding that you need to be anti-fragile and have the right foundations in a complex world, that you need to be anticipatory as you think about the future, and that you need the agility to emerge here and now, because the decisions you make today through your agency determine the future. That's it for me.
Oh, thank you, Rogers. Not future me, future us. Very inspiring, your presentation.